Thank you, everybody, for tuning in to another episode of Coder Conversations. Today we have Owen Andruchow. Welcome to the show, man.
Thank you. Thank you very much, guys.
Thanks for coming on.
Absolutely.
Yeah, glad to have you on, man. If you don't mind, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? Can you give us your background and what you do?
Yeah, so my name's Owen. I am a Seattle-based indie film and video game composer, a little bit of television work as well. But I've been doing that here in Seattle for about 3 years professionally. I've been composing for short films for quite a while now, ever since my undergrad at Hofstra University on Long Island in New York. But
Nice.
yeah. So it's been a part of my compositional career for a long time, but really seriously and pursuing it as a profession, that's been the past 2, 3 years. I moved to Seattle kind of on the second half of COVID, the tail end of COVID. So it was
Right.
2021. Yeah, and I did I came to Seattle and did the Pacific Northwest Film Scoring Master's Program. Did that for a year, an intensive film scoring program. After that, it's been really just grinding it out here in Seattle, making connections, scoring short films, getting some video game opportunities now, which is really exciting.
Right.
Actually, yeah, I actually just got a game demo is up on Steam right now. The initial page is up there, so that's pretty exciting. That's my first game demo opportunity that I've has kind of like shown out in the public now. So that's super exciting. So yeah, as we
Right.
were talking about, I'm doing the film scoring, freelance film scoring and video game composing grind, and it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of work, but it is a lot of fun. So that's kind of where I'm at right now.
Cool. And you said you were in Long Island?
I was, yeah, that's where I did my undergrad at Hofstra University. I studied film
Nice.
scoring there, and I learned how to do electronic music. I learned how to score films there, but I came
Yeah,
here.
that's where I am, Long Island, New York.
Oh, sweet. Yeah, I actually think we might have talked about that over LinkedIn when we were first chatting. Yeah, I think I remember that.
Yeah, so I have family here, so I'm here for the moment. I was out in LA for like 10 years
Right.
because
So
I'm a musician.
How was the move to Seattle? Was it like completely different from Long Island?
Well, it's interesting. When I moved here to Seattle, it was really just all school, you know? So I
Yeah.
didn't really experience Seattle until I already been here for about a year, especially because of this program I went to. It's a 1-year master's program, so they fit everything. And there are certain sections of it, it's really just 10 months. And there are certain sections of it that are incredibly intense. So it was like my apartment to the school building, back to my apartment, like 5 days a week. And I wasn't, so that's it. So I think I settled into Seattle a bit organically without really even realizing it. And then once I kind of like emerged from the darkness of being a grad student, I have come to really like it. I did spend a lot of time on Long Island for my undergrad, but I'm actually from Boston, Massachusetts. And there's a lot of parallels, between the I guess that the scale and the size of the city. It's something I'm very comfortable with, So I liked that transfer. Definitely different than a city like Chicago or New York, incredibly metropolitan. Whereas you get both worlds here, and you get more neighborhoody, naturey, but also plenty of city feel as well. And I like that environment. So yeah, the transfer to Seattle has been really nice, and I can see myself. I don't know exactly where I'm going to end up, but I definitely see myself staying here for, at the very least, the time being.
Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, after you got out of school, how did you get your first opportunity?
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting thing because the opportunities, it's so much of a slow burn that you don't necessarily know whether or not an opportunity is big or not when you're getting it. You kind of just do it, and then in retrospect, you realize, oh damn, I've done a lot this year. But at least this is my experience, because and maybe I'll kind of give you a little bit of background as to why it seems that way for me. I guess the difference between having a career like this in a city like Seattle versus a city like, say, LA, right, is that everybody's experience is different. But basically, for me, when you are really trying to get into contact with your own client base rather than working for someone else, it's kind of ambiguous when the success kind of starts, because you just build this network and then people are interested in you. Even if you haven't even gotten an opportunity yet, you now know people in the industry, you feel comfortable at networking events, and you feel good. This is my experience. I felt so much more secure before I actually even had jobs. Whereas if you move down to LA and you just get this orchestrating gig with Tim Davies or Tim Williams, if your listeners don't know who those people are, they are just top tier orchestrators. Down in LA. So I'm sure you're familiar. It's like, okay, you've got the gig, that's like, and you network in the same way, but I don't think there are, I hope I'm using this term correctly, I don't know if there are as many clear watershed moments like that here. Now there certainly can be.
Yeah, I mean, but, LA is tough because it's just so hyper competitive.
It is
so many talented musicians, composers, orchestrators. You have so much talent in this one city. So like, I grew up in Connecticut, Bridgeport, Connecticut, and I was kind of like a bigger fish in that pond. But then once I moved out to LA, I'm a drummer. I was once again a small fish in a very large pond.
For sure. And so and there are advantages and disadvantages to both of those things. But just to kind of like circle back and answer your original question, Kevin, kind of like more pinpoint it, I think so like I said, things continuously, there was like this pattern of feeling a lot more secure before I actually kind of had jobs because I was in the network, right? But I think the jobs like for me lagged about a year behind, which honestly I don't think is too uncommon. It takes years to get this stuff kind of thing going, especially because the people you are connecting with are, they're dispersed, they're everywhere, especially if you're developing your own client base. Everybody's working on their own projects. Many people need music. But one of the best things I did for myself was going to GDC this past year. I actually met 2 developers whom I have worked with since going. So that's incredible. There's this video game, titled Mech Storm. It's this driving combat game. You can find it on Steam, not yet playable, but the trailers are up there. So that's super exciting. I just met that guy back in April. That turned out to be my first publicized video game gig.
Sweet.
And then so that's super exciting. I met another group of developers too. That project is still yet to be released, so I can't say much about it. But just to say, like, a huge pivot point for me was GDC. I highly recommend if you want to network in games and that's a great place to, at the very least, just meet important people. And if you get lucky, you'll find people who are at the right time to give you work, and you can negotiate yourself into that situation, which I was lucky enough to be able to do. But that was huge. Another piece that has helped me out are the kind of the networking groups here in Seattle. The Seattle Indies is a huge community, which I've met some potential collaborators through, and also the Seattle Film Summit. I met a trio of brothers who are some incredibly talented filmmakers here who I've worked with a little bit as well. And I think that will be a fruitful relationship that will, go on to hopefully produce some really cool things. So it's, yeah. So it's showing up early, showing up often to these, to these networking communities, and focusing on building relationships and establishing relationships, but investing in them as well. And knowing that that's kind of you don't want to be like it's tough for composers, especially because we usually come on the tail end of a project, but it's easy for us to just like show up to a place and be all desperate and like, I need a job, but you want to you want to tailor that impulse, and the more you can, and the more you can just really focus on it's the relationship first mentality. How can I help you? What can I do for you? How are you? How are things going? What's your project been like? People like working with people they like, and that has served me well in that sort of thing. Again, this is why this answer's hard to this question's hard to answer. Sorry, is because things develop so slowly over time, but it's worth investing in, and maybe it'll take a couple years. It's taken me like 2 years to the point where I feel like, yeah, within the next 6 months, I might be doing this full time.
Right.
Which is really, really sweet.
That's the goal, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome, man. Okay, so if you're not able to do it full time, like what are some of the things you do to be able to support yourself so that you can eventually transition into that full time?
Yeah, absolutely. So the side hustle economy is real. I feel like many creatives have to do it. I know many people just teach piano lessons. I did that for a while. For some reason, I figured that wasn't for me. So I was content with doing things on the side that weren't music related. Like I was a barista at Metropolitan Market for a while, which is just this grocery store chain here in Seattle. That was fine. It did what I needed to do. I'm lucky enough to be able to work remotely for my parents as well. Like, I don't know, 10 to 15 hours a week. I've been able to, and I'm also now I'm something that I'm actually a bit more excited about. Because it's more music related, is this teaching opportunity I have, which I think we spoke about this maybe before we went live. So the Pacific Northwest Film Scoring Program, which I attended, I'm now teaching at. So that's super exciting because a lot of that, the specific class I'm teaching, which is more or less like a film score philosophy class, I learned a tremendous amount from. Going over all the material has been super helpful for me, and I'm pretty excited to teach it. For that institution, I also do tech support as well. So at the moment, yeah, it's funny. It sounds like a lot, but it's so interspersed. And the course, it's 1 quarter, so it's only going to really take up the fall. The tech support's coming in a couple times a month throughout the year, if that. And then I have this remote job that I do. It's kind of like in the family company that kind of keeps me steady.
So now what is the family business?
Yeah, no, so that's interesting. It's totally, not music related at all. My dad is a ornamental iron worker by trade, very artistic one, which makes, the kind of the content I get to engage in very interesting. So his company's called Woven Steel. It's a metal shop in East Boston. And I do a lot of computer work for them. I do some client data management. I manage social media, and I built and maintained the website, which that skill actually was very helpful in building my own website, and learning about how to manage a social media account has been very helpful for me to eventually apply that to my own social media account. So, I mean, you can tell the grind. You want to take information wherever you can and just apply it. So even though it's not music related at all, I have been trying to think of how to connect things. And it's it's stuff. I'm very happy to do it because I'm happy to help out the family business. And honestly, it's something that I might even do indefinitely in some capacity.
Yeah, and it reminds me of my own networking. Like I've been networking for probably 2 or 3 years on LinkedIn, and only recently have I been networking in the music and game industries. I used to be a programmer, so I was just in tech. I was just mostly networking with full stack developers, front end developers, web devs, software devs, stuff like that. But from everything I've learned over the past couple of years, now I'm applying to this podcast. And what I'm finding is that we're able to book, a lot of really interesting people in the music industry, in the game industry, in the tech industry. And it's coming together pretty nicely so far.
That's sweet. Actually, I have a question about that, Brian. What has been the difference in experience for you between networking in these 2 different industries over LinkedIn?
Oh, so you mean the difference between like the game industry and the tech industry?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, with the tech industry, that's where most of my followers. So I have 50,000
Mm,
followers on LinkedIn. So the bulk of my followers are tech, front end developers, full stack developers, and they engage in my content if it's, computer related. But if I'm posting about like, I'm a video game music composer as well. So like if I'm posting about video game stuff or I'm posting about music lessons because I teach drums too, I don't really see much engagement anymore from my LinkedIn because primarily it's full of programmers.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I found you can totally. I haven't quite perfected or even really seriously attempted the online networking strategy. I've used online tools as like a supplement to what I do. Most of really all the connections I've made have been, or I'd say most of the connections I've made have been through person, and I've kind of used online to follow up and stuff. Um,
That's great that you have those in-person skills though to build your network. That's really important.
it totally is a skill to build for sure, especially kind of thinking back up to what I was saying earlier. The first time you show up at a networking event and really the only thing on your mind is I want a job. That's that's a pretty gnarly recipe for probably just like embarrassment, which is, it happens.
Oh yeah,
You,
yeah.
you gotta you gotta really like, because the people a lot of these networking events are also social events too, especially here in Seattle. Like a lot of them will be at bars in Capitol Hill. Um,
Okay.
and people want to really just enjoy themselves. They understand they're at a networking event, are maybe going to meet potential collaborators, but it's definitely not a highfalutin business transaction sort of environment. And that's something to
Right.
get used to. And that's something to be patient with too. Because that can be super hard when
Well,
really you just know you want work. Yeah.
I think a lot of people miss that piece in networking is that it's,
Mm.
it's a long game. You're in it
Oh,
for the
for
long
sure.
run. You're developing relationships for, potentially the rest of your career. So, putting a lot of time into online networking, really, it does pay off, but it may not be overnight.
No, I mean it's the I don't think anything happens overnight. An overnight success. I'm attributing this quote to Donald Glover, but I could totally be wrong. I don't know who said this, but it's totally true. There's 5 years of work behind a seeming overnight success, right?
Right.
Because some people can pop up out of nowhere, but it doesn't mean they just got super lucky, right? That's just like when people knew them. But they're
Kind of
yeah,
like pop stars, like people end up on the radio and you're like, I never heard of that person. Now they're selling out stadiums.
yeah, right, right. Um, but undoubtedly, some preliminary work, probably some significant preliminary work, went into that in
Oh,
order to make that
absolutely.
happen. Yeah,
Or there's
yeah.
family connections like Billie Eilish. I think both of her parents are involved in music already.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, so I guess when you think about it from that perspective, some people do get lucky in that they have the right family or the right friends. I guess there's a way of thinking about that where like there were generations of work that went into this popularity that this person
Yeah.
is now the beneficiary of. But even still, even once you get your big opportunity, if you get that and you just stop being social and you stop networking and you stop being in the public eye, like there's no guarantee that you're going to continue to be collaborating with people and be wanted. So you can't just turn. It's not like
Yeah.
you get your first job because of all this networking and then you can throw that away. It is you might not have to do it as intensely, but you still have to be in that bubble as well. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes me think about I forget who the composer was, but he made a beat for Destiny's Child. I think that song Survivor.
Mm.
And he got paid like 50 grand for the beat, but what did he do after that? You know, I don't think he really did anything after producing that beat. So it's like it shows you have to stay in the industry, you need to stay relevant to stay working.
Yeah, that actually reminds me of something I learned in the program. The lead instructor, he's since retired, but he was still running the show for the most part when I was there. His name's Hummy Man. He's a 2-time Emmy Award winner. Some of his more well-known projects are with Mel Brooks. So if you've heard of the film Robin Hood Men in Tights, he scored that film. Yeah. So, he did that. He, back in the day, I think was a ghostwriter for The Simpsons. He composed on the Looney Tunes. He would do arrangements for the teams that were working with people like Aretha Franklin. A pretty hefty resume. This is the guy
heavy hitter.
Heavy hitter. Absolutely. Yeah. So anyway, that his name's Hummy Man. He created the curriculum and everything. But just some off the cuff remark I remember him saying, and it could have just been at like a dinner or something. He talked about the film Napoleon Dynamite and how nobody knows the composer to the film Napoleon Dynamite. I don't know the composer to the film Napoleon Dynamite. I don't even know if he did. And his point was that if you were the composer to Napoleon Dynamite, it's a shame that people don't know who you are, because if you made the right moves, people totally could. Right. So similar to this guy who made this beat, a huge opportunity and a blast off success. It doesn't guarantee anything other than that first order consequence, which is it's a blast off success, but
so it's like, okay, the guy might have made like 50 grand off the beat, but then what did he do after that? I don't think he really did anything after that.
Yeah, exactly. So that's also the socialization and the networking and the being in the industry. Still, it always takes work.
Right. Nothing's overnight.
No.
So you're kind of bringing it back to the networking thing. How do you how do you make sure you're productive at these events? Like, okay, you show up and you're not just having too much fun and not making connections and also not appearing thirsty. Like, how do you find that balance?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And that's something that's a constantly changing question. For me, there are trade-offs to consider. For me, when I started out, I was really so much in information gathering mode. And I think that was very beneficial because I would ask tons of questions and I carried a notebook around with me and I'd write down the answers. Eventually, I'd shed the notebook and I just had my phone notes app to kind of make it seem more natural. But still, I was clearly the guy, the beginner showing up, asking questions, looking for advice. And I didn't really know I was that guy when I started out, but I totally was. And now it's beneficial because, to be honest, people like talking. People like telling their stories. A lot of people are very happy to help.
Absolutely.
So like it's good. I think I had a lot of, coffees and beers and just conversations at networking events that went really well for that reason. Now, and I would ask a lot of people the same question too. And eventually I started getting enough of the same answers. And so that, I didn't need to really ask the questions anymore. And I kind of realized, I was like, okay, like I don't really need to have this. And I kind of went in with a bit of a playbook too. It's like, this is what I want to figure out from this person, but it's going to be, I'm not
like you had to
interrogate them in my head a little bit. And what I tried to balance, like you said, Kevin, of not feeling thirsty, right, is like, I don't want to sound it like I'm interrogating this person because that will make them uncomfortable, will make me uncomfortable. But but yeah, there's so much valuable information that's just like kind of in the ether in this industry that is hard to get, especially when it comes to legal stuff. Like, how do you, what does a good contract look like? And how do I sign myself efficiently up for like a PRO, performance right organization? Like those sorts of things, you learn what you learn in school. But it's for some reason it's harder to get this information as an artist maybe than as someone who went to law school or something like that. That's just an example.
You probably learn a lot of it on the fly though.
You learn a lot of it on the fly. So anyway, as I developed that, I realized like I was kind of past the like the novice, just information gathering phase. And I did that because going to events was overwhelming, and talking to people was overwhelming, and I didn't want information to pass by me. But once you do that enough, you start to just like encode it, and then you can go and you can have further conversations without having to write everything down, because you're just familiar with the language now. You're just familiar with the industry. Because another thing, I didn't know anything, and I'm still learning a lot about games and game development. I didn't know anything about games before I moved to Seattle. It was all just film focused. And then I learned that there was a big industry here, so I started trying to learn. But once I had maybe like 8 months to a year of doing that sort of thing, the next year felt a whole lot different. And it was really more just showing up and having conversations. I wasn't so much focused in getting all the information and making the world make sense to me. Now it was just, okay, I'm gonna really just focus on building relationships, and investing.
Just focus on people, getting to know people,
right,
certain relationships. Yeah,
it's down to the level of just personal interaction. And
as simple as that might sound, it's really important. I think
it's really important, and it's hard when you're in a very new place, which so I don't think I could have done that from the start. I felt I didn't feel comfortable enough. I felt like I didn't know enough. I felt like if I were just walking in,
I guess like Kevin was saying, like, how do you appear not thirsty? That's a great question.
Right. And honestly, I'm not gonna try and tout myself as someone who had 100% success. It's like I've definitely embarrassed myself, and I definitely left a conversation knowing that that person just like looked at me and smiled and shook my hand and did not care. So that happens. That happens. So and you learn from those moments. But it's it was a bit of a development. It was kind of a two-phase thing for me. It was like the first phase was like having a whole networking tracker spreadsheet of everybody I meet and writing down notes and getting all the information. What are all the different industry groups here? How is everything tied to each other? Once that becomes more of like intrinsic knowledge, like instinctual knowledge, I can show up to these places and not feel like I'm starting from ground zero. And it's really just building relationships. And people sense that too. Like I started, it's confidence. Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. So, and honestly, I attribute the success I had at GDC to the fact, largely in part to the fact that I spent a year in Seattle just learning how to network. I think I made a good impression on the developers that I did at GDC because I wasn't in that. No, I wasn't any longer in that. Notebook and pencil mode of just writing down everything. Otherwise, they wouldn't have wanted to hire me, right? It's like, okay, this guy is obviously a novice. This guy is not a professional.
Right. It's like, who's this guy with his notebook at the event?
Yeah, exactly. Right. So I was luckily, I the timing was right where I had already done a year of that. And by the time I was there, I think I was still, it's not like I stopped gathering information and kind of like trying to pivot in new mysterious areas that I don't understand, but I can do so more successfully without feeling overwhelmed at this point.
Sure.
And that just provides for a more comfortable conversation, honestly, which is good because you really want people work with people who they like. I mean, I remember the times I've gotten interest in being hired by someone who I'm just like, I know, like I am 99% sure they did not even look at my reel. Like, I don't think they might have seen my website and seen, okay, that looks good. That looks professional. We might have had a conversation, and people in the creative industry are willing to just take that leap of faith. A lot of the times, a lot of people will look at your reel. It's not like no one will, but I have been surprised at the instances where I thought I was going to have to really pitch myself. And
they just kind of liked you.
Yeah. Now, of course, you can't just show up and do like a garbage job. You gotta, right? Because then you'll be revealed as a fraud. But
sure.
Yeah. So it's, you're continuously learning new things for sure. And that was one of the surprising things I learned.
So to kind of dive a little bit deeper into the the actual part of pitching yourself. So say you're in a conversation with a guy, say you're a fairly new composer, maybe of a couple of albums that's unreleased. Like, how do you actually go about saying, hey, I want to do music for your game? And, are you charging initially, like just starting out, or are you going to do some free projects just to get your name out there?
Yeah, so that's interesting. I received two really important pieces of advice early on that I kind of combined for myself, and so far it's been working. The first one I got was really what I've been talking about, which is invest in relationships, make friends, really, especially in games. People just love working with their friends, And there's enough talented people here that you don't really have to worry about. Well, I guess I should back up and say that, like I said, virtually no one is coming into these events with like this highfalutin business attitude. All these people are incredibly talented,
or casual.
and it's also very casual. So it's just you just forget about whatever correlation you think exists between having to present as a professional business person versus being one in this traditional sense, right? So shed that.
Sure.
So that totally exists. So to really get that advice of make friendships was huge because I had never heard of it discussed that way. Now, and this was by my instructors, specifically two very talented and successful game composers and sound designers here, Ryan Ike and Akash Dakar. They've done a lot of great work here in the Seattle games industry. They also taught. They were two of my instructors at the program. Now, another piece of advice, I did a networking trip once down in LA because a lot of the people who graduate this program end up moving to LA. So I was able to network with a few of those. And I hope these people don't mind that I'm name dropping them, but they're public figures.
Yeah.
They all have IMDb pages. So, but this other
they're doing something right.
They're doing something right. This other composer I met down there, who I met in person down there. I'd actually had a few conversations with him. Something he told me was, don't be afraid to pitch yourself when the time is right. And I hadn't heard that before because I think, like I said, a lot of composers go into these meetings only wanting to pitch themselves, and that turns people off. But if you find the right moment,
sure,
that there totally are. And I thought that was super interesting. And combining the make friends, but then when you see an opportunity, kind of show yourself off if you feel that it's comfortable. That has worked well, and I think that was partially what helped me out in GDC and also developing film connections here in Seattle through the Seattle Film Summit. Is if you have a conversation or a multitude of conversations that result at some point in someone clearly being interested in you, it's like now this person is interested in what you have to say. You're an expert in music in this conversation, right? There are the film experts,
right,
the developer experts. You're the music expert.
Right.
People are going to turn to you.
Right.
What do you have to say? Especially if this person has some sort of opening. If they start asking you about yourself, that's really that's your moment, right?
That's your in.
That's your in, and that's your conversationally comfortable way to pitch yourself because they're not interested in you. Well, what do you do? What kind of music do you write? And then starting to ask questions. It's like, oh, so what do you do for music on your projects, right? It's clearly a question that's like, I want to know if there's a job for me subliminally, but it's also it makes sense to ask that question in the context because you've already developed a bit of a relationship with this person and they're interested in you. And you're at this networking event. People do business here, right? So it's not totally I'm glad I got that second piece of advice because I could easily think that all I have to do is just make friends and the business part will take care of itself.
Which it won't.
Right, exactly. It won't. You just don't want to lean into that business part up front.
But it's like you're saying,
Yeah.
it's not enough just to be friends with these people. You do have to actively promote yourself too.
Yeah, and nothing deals in absolutes. Like people have totally different experiences. You can consider these, like, I guess, tidbits of advice or wisdom in terms of just averages. I'd say on average, yes. If um, that is true. That's not to say that someone just can't have a friendship and then it all works out because they trust this person and they already have contracts ready and whatever, and they know you and they're not going to screw you over. It's like, good non sticky situations happen like that all the time, but a lot
Right.
of a lot of business and meeting strangers, ultimately, when it comes down to it, um, a lot of those situations aren't going to be like that, even if you are on that friendly um, side. People aren't just going to start all of a sudden doing things for you. you know
Right, absolutely. I mean, it
yeah.
makes me think of my networking for this show. I
Hmm.
just treat it, I treat it in a very basic way. I reach out to someone, I'll say, something like, hey, thanks for connecting. I see you are a developer at Rockstar Games. That's awesome. And then I'll wait, maybe 30 seconds, 45 seconds, and then I'll reach out with my warm prospecting message about, okay, I do a podcast twice a week. It's a techie podcast about life in general. Would you be interested in coming on the show sometime? So, in a nutshell, that's what I'm saying. And so it's very basic, but I've been getting really good responses from that. So I kind of keep moving forward with that type of strategy because it's been working to get some larger names on the show.
Yeah, it's really sweet. How's this? How long have you guys been doing Coder Conversations?
Well, yeah, it's been over like maybe like over 2 years. Brian came on in the past few months, and yeah, he's been doing really amazing things with the networking. I think the organic approach is really what's been working well.
Sweet, sweet. Yeah, it totally felt organic in our case too, because we had a conversation. I can't even remember when you mentioned the podcast, but the
Right.
minute or the second I saw that, I was like, oh, hell yeah, right?
Yeah,
Why not?
I may have shared with you my video game music first. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think you did. Yeah, yeah, and we talked a little bit about like how you had
Okay.
been in LA and all
Oh,
that
awesome.
too.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it sounds like there's some similarities there, like just getting to actually know somebody, being interested in what they do, and not just trying to pitch your thing, because relationships are really what matters at the end. I feel not just like two
Yeah,
people using each other.
people like working with people. That's for sure. Um, AI hasn't taken over yet. It's funny, as I've gotten more
Right.
comfortable in just developing these relationships and actually getting some work opportunities now, I'm becoming less stressed about AI. Also, I think I have a bit of a better understanding of how LLMs work, at least from a conceptual perspective. And I mean, people might want to debate me on this, and I honestly don't know much, but my intuition is that they're incredibly powerful, but they're just so not human to me that I don't worry
Yeah.
about them right now.
Right.
Just mechanically how
Right.
they function. They're like these prediction machines. They don't really think. They just guess, and they guess really, really well. But sometimes
Right. They
they don't.
guess.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
A lot of
Um,
guesswork.
yeah, it is. It's so much based on probabilities. That's kind of a side point. Um, but it is relevant, I guess, relating to the developing relationships sort of thing. I mentioned this game Mech Storm, which has a Steam page at the moment. One of the first thing I talked about with that developer, I think he asked me what I thought about AI music. Um, and I might have asked him. We were just talking about it, and we both kind of came down on the point is that yeah, it's good to get you started, but it's hard to get what you need from it, at least from the AI that exists
Sure.
today, because you can't
Sure.
really have this sort of developmental conversation you can have with a person. And that's just as the technology exists today. Like, who knows what it's going to look like next month at this point.
Like more nuanced conversation.
Right. And more integrated too in like the process, because like I don't know if an AI that can hook up directly to my digital audio workstation, maybe that exists. I'm not. There might be some AI. So I use Logic Pro, which is just it's a
Right.
music composition tool.
Yeah, Logic's great. A lot of
Logic's
people
fantastic.
a lot of people use Pro Tools as well, but yeah,
Pro
Logic's
Tools.
great.
Yeah. So the anyway, I guess where I'm going with this is that AI is it's very impressive what it can do right now, but beyond it being impressive, its its utility is ultimately what matters.
Yeah,
and
right.
Yeah, like
as
even
far
in
as like
the
pitching, yeah,
even in the tech industry right now, with coding,
right.
AI is pretty much a scaffolding tool. Like you use it to build the general skeleton, but you need a senior to come in and mold the code to what it needs to be to overlook what's being outputted to make sure it's right. So, the human element is going to be there, but it might be less opportunities for juniors, but if you know what you're doing, the opportunities are still going to be there.
Yeah, I think that's the tough. So you said there's less opportunity for juniors.
Yeah, correct. A lot of the easy
Right.
tasks that they would do, the AI
Right.
can.
I think there's a parallel problem for composers too, and this might be across all industries, is that AI might eat up a lot of beginner starting out opportunities, which are vital for, in this case, composers to get their first gigs, just to build a portfolio and say, yeah, hey, I've worked on this. I think it will and probably has made that aspect difficult. Um, I was lucky enough to do a fair amount of film scoring during my years at my undergrad, so I was able to put together a bit of a portfolio even before I came to school. Um,
That's really important.
yeah, it is important, and just say like, yeah, I've worked with directors, but I hadn't yet done that with developers yet. So again, like I said, that there's an element of luck to all of it. The fact that I've been able to meet the people I do, but the AI for beginners might just mean the starting years, at least right now, the starting years, that process might just be a little bit longer because
Right.
some of those beginning opportunities will be sucked up by people easily, picking something from something like Artlist.io, just AI music creating machines. So kind of parallel to the junior coders. That's probably true. So it's just another hurdle, but it's not a barrier, I wouldn't say.
Yeah,
Now,
that's
can
why I
you
also.
share with our? Can you? Sorry, Kevin. Can you share with our listeners what the GDC is?
Oh, right, GDC, yeah.
Yeah.
Game Developer Conference. So, there are a lot of different game conferences throughout America, at least. There's Game SoundCon and PAX East and PAX West, but the Game Developer Conference is really the premier spot to be for games. I guess it's similar to saying
Nice.
Sundance Film Festival, but for games.
Oh wow, that's awesome.
Yeah. So San Francisco is where it's held. It's like 3 or 4 days. There are speakers. There are performances. I don't know if you're familiar with the composer Austin Wintory, but he did a show there this year, which was super exciting. I got to see that. That was fun. Just conducted
Nice.
a whole program of game music, but there's tons of networking as well. And the great thing about this convention is it probably, at least out of all the ones I've been to, and maybe out of all of the game conventions that exist, there are more business meetup networking opportunities than others. Because to any game convention, an aspect of it is going to be consumer focused. So there's PAX, right, which is one that happens in Seattle, PAX West,
and then Boston, right, the East.
And then there's PAX East, yep, and then there's PAX Unplugged in Philly. I think that one's more board games, but those.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. There used to be one in Austin, Texas, I think too, but I think that one got discontinued after COVID. But anyway, the PAX is very similar to GDC, except for the fact that it's very consumer focused. There are business opportunities,
right,
there are networking opportunities, but it's like, I don't know, 70-75% commercial, or just the consumer. And
like consumer facing. Yeah,
absolutely right. So GDC, I mean, it's at least 50-50, if not like 60-40, as far as networking and meeting people. So yeah, at least that was my experience. So I just noticed, because I had been to PAX and then I went to GDC, and I noticed how much easier it was to find people who just wanted to connect and were building projects, and like, we're we're just interested in you. Yeah. It's tailored more for that sort of conversation.
For sure, that's huge.
Absolutely.
But yeah, to take it back, man. Speaking of AI, I think that's why you mentioning that you're networking in person. I think that's really important because at the end of the day, that's one of the things that AI can't do for you is go meet up with somebody at a bar, form a friendship.
Yeah, and I think actually, if I remember my first, I wouldn't even call it a networking attempt. It's more just like a public outreach attempt, was on Instagram. I had because I had a whole portfolio of stuff I had done before the Pacific Northwest Film Scoring Program, and then during, and I had all this music that was just sitting on my hard drive, and I just didn't know what to do with it. And I was just like, okay, I'll show people, and I'll do that on Instagram, right? What better place to do it? And I thought up of this whole release plan that I really thought was going to get a substantial amount of views. Like, I thought this was how I was going to start making connections, but I just didn't understand how Instagram worked and how engagement worked. And after like, I was at it for a bit, maybe after like 15 posts or so not incredibly long, but like, it was like once or twice a week. I did it for a couple months, and I was making sure all the graphics looked nice and my music was in there, and I was linking to my website, and I was just adding blurbs about my music. I just thought, like, if I got all the information there and it looked nice, that people would listen. And if you're interested, it is on my Instagram. You can find me at Ono Notes. Like, all that stuff is still there. That's OHNO_notes. But it's not really the type of stuff that gets good engagement on Instagram. People get good engagement, and reels get good engagement. And I had figured that out kind of because I failed at doing this one way. I wouldn't call it a failure, but it definitely wasn't the success I was hoping for. So I kind of turned that off, and I just said, all right, I'm going to just go start trying to find meetings and meeting people in person. And then I've been doing that ever since. And I do understand that maybe you don't need, but you can definitely, it's very beneficial to have an in-person and an online component to your networking, for sure. And maybe even do them equally. Right now, I'm like 80% in person, like 20% online. I'd like to even that out. But I figured just the online thing, that it didn't grow great. I'm going to try this other thing. Okay, that started to work. I hope within this year or next, I can start incorporating more online content, because you definitely do reach people that you wouldn't be able to reach otherwise. Like this conversation, honestly, like, if we didn't have LinkedIn, we wouldn't be here. And that's a great thing. So, if you think, I guess if I were to give a piece of advice, if you're good at one of these two things, making in-person relationships, or, creating a YouTube channel or something like that, lean into that at first. But be willing and be prepared to eventually do both, because those are the people I found who find the best success. And that's what I'm going to try to do. That's kind of like the next stage for me, I think.
Absolutely. So, like, how important is, I would say, like the back end before you do in person marketing? Meaning, like, okay, I have my website ready. I have my music is easy to get to. Everything looks professional. Because like when you pitch yourself, you
Yeah,
don't want to showcase something that looks like amateurish.
I know it. Well, so that's an interesting thing. Like, you want before I went to the game developer conference, I did my best to make sure my website was as good as it can be. And I honestly don't think I got it all set up in time, but I made sure that the week after I finished it before I started actually reaching out to people. But so yeah, I mean, you want to make your Instagram look good. You want to make your LinkedIn look good. If you're on Twitter, that too, but I'm because that's big for games. You want to make all these profiles look professional so that when people open up to your page, they know what you do, they know who you are. Your first few pieces of content suggest that, so if you have a music Instagram, but it's just photos of like you with your family on vacation, well, maybe you should actually have a music Instagram and just not use your personal one for music. That's what I ended up doing. So yeah, you do want to set these things up so that when someone looks you up, it is clear what you do, and that's people aren't just gonna look at you and become uninterested. Now that being said, you don't want all of that to become a crux to you actually going out there and making connections. You're gonna have to be okay with having an. I mean, this is me right now. I have an imperfect online presence. I think it's been good enough to make the connections I've had, and I only aim to improve it. Um, but yeah, there are parts of my website that I want to update. My IMDb has like half of what I've done. Funny enough, I need to put like everything else up there that I've done so far. And you could view it as like, all right, I'm not going to go out until all that's perfect because then people will see me and not know what they're looking at. Um, but then you're missing out on all those opportunities to actually meet people because the truth is most people you meet aren't going to even see your online profile. The people who are and will get you'll actually get opportunities from, they will, and that's important. um, but it's definitely not the case that one needs to be perfect so that you can start doing this other thing. You can do them in tandem and try to kind of keep both balanced, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's a great point about not waiting
Yeah,
until everything's quote unquote perfect because otherwise you're never going to get started. You're just gonna.
yeah, right.
So like yeah, we kind of talked about the networking thing, but let's get into your personal projects. What are some of your
Mhm.
favorite personal projects you've worked on?
Yeah, so I last year I worked on this short film um, by one of the directors who I met here through the Seattle Film Summit, which premiered at Harbor Island Studios. So, if there are any Seattleites listening to this podcast, Harbor Island Studios is on Harbor Island, which is just in the industrial district of Seattle. And it's a fairly new soundstage that opened up. Seattle's trying to expand its film incentive, doing it bit by bit every year, giving more opportunities, tax breaks to filmmakers here. And as a part of this movement, they opened up this soundstage where filmmakers can build sets, shoot their films, and all sorts of other things. It's just, it's a great place to get film work done. And as a part of that premiere, there were these 3 films that were shot there within 72 hours. And I got to work on one of them. The title of the film is Eve of Eternity. That's the score you can actually find on my website, which is also ononotes.com. I think you can find that on my LinkedIn somewhere. And that was super exciting because it was by far the most impressive and professional production I had worked on up to that point. And the fact that I had made that connection really made me feel very positively about my future prospects of being a film composer here in Seattle. I always had the sense that games. This is one of Seattle's one of the game hubs of the world. So if I put my head down, I'll be able to make it in that area. I wasn't so sure with film. I didn't really know what was here, but I've that was my first glimpse exciting opportunity, which told me, okay, yeah, it's going to be a little bit more difficult, or it's probably the opportunities are going to be a bit more few and far between. But that talent exists here as well, and I was lucky enough to be on one of those projects that premiered at Harbor Island Studios. Um, so yeah, that was super exciting. That was last year in it was April. It was last April. So that was a lot of fun.
Oh, that's awesome, man. So yeah, Brian, he lost his connection, but he wanted to ask, do you prefer networking in person or online?
Yeah, I mean, right now in person, to be honest, because I don't know how to do it online yet. Really, I use, like I said, I use my online presence as a way to really keep up with people who I have met in person. But I, yeah, we'll see what I prefer once I actually get the online, maybe some sort of consistent Instagram presence rolling out, posting projects on LinkedIn. Um, so the answer is in person, but it's really just because that's the only answer I can possibly give at this point.
Right. Yeah, I think what's
Right.
so tough about networking online is if you don't know the algorithm, you're just gonna get buried. Like you can have the perfect little reel,
Oh
but
man, yeah, yeah. So unfortunately, I can't give any advice there. I mean, that was really what the whole tough thing about my first attempt at Instagrams. I thought I knew what would please the algorithm, and it totally wasn't. So I kind of had two choices. I could figure all that out, but then I kind of got sick of just staying in my apartment all day, because it does take that. It takes a lot of solitude to do this sort of thing. And I just needed more personal engagement. So I went ahead and did that. Um, but yeah, finding out what the algorithm likes is a venture in and of itself. I would even say that there's a parallel between this first year of networking I did, where I was just with my notebook taking notes and trying to find information. I bet you it's going to take about that much time just figuring out what kind of content even works online. So this is the first time I'm actually thinking about that, but it might take that. There might there might be a notebook phase for my Instagram, and if I ever want to make a YouTube channel, I feel like that'll definitely be the case for me.
yeah, that's what's so interesting is I actually took one of these LinkedIn. It teaches you how to grow your presence on LinkedIn, but
Mm,
like if I didn't take that course, then 90% of the stuff I wouldn't have been able to figure out because it's not common sense. Like for example, like you should maybe post these big images because LinkedIn kind of looks at the time that somebody scrolls on your posts and pictures stop and make them pay attention.
mm,
Therefore, you get a higher priority, and it also takes like I guess your past 10 posts averages them out. And if there's a lot of engagement, it's going to promote you more. But if you have posts that have low engagement, it's going to start like neutering you a little bit. So it makes sense to delete underperforming posts. Like it's the stuff like you can't just figure out.
right. Yeah, that's an interesting point. It's how the stuff's not necessarily intuitive. So would you say that this course you took, these sorts of online courses, or if I found one for YouTube, say, you think it would be worth checking out?
So for YouTube, I've actually bought one,
Mm,
and YouTube pretty much boils down to high quality thumbnails, high quality titles, good video editing and consistency. Like I didn't see any like magical formula for YouTube
mm,
to really make it grow. Like like our channel, it has about close to 600 subscribers over 2 years, so it hasn't quite
mm,
blown up yet. But I think
hmm.
that's good because a lot of people are one hit wonders. Like they
Right.
they have that viral video, but they don't have the content consistency to keep the momentum going.
Yeah, you want to see growth, and you don't want to be stuck. Um, so it seems like what you said about a year or two, and you have seen fairly steady growth for YouTube.
Yeah, like the most growth we usually see is like when we have a big guest on. So, for example,
Right.
we had Kyle Simpson in He's really big in the programming world, like an author. He wrote most of the big Java, well, not most of them, but he wrote a lot of big JavaScript books, and he brought a lot of subscribers. And then we had a couple of other people that once they come on, they bring their following to you. So I think that's one of the ways to really grow now.
Mm,
Like somebody has to put
right.
you on.
Yeah, that's a great move. Because I would even just say myself right now, it's like virtually everyone will accept an invitation to come on a podcast and talk about themselves. So it's a brilliant idea. I can only imagine it's helped you guys out tremendously, and I'm totally happy to be here too.
Oh yeah, man. Definitely glad to have you here, man. It's always
Right.
interesting, like hearing these alternative experiences. Like I never knew like in person networking was that important because most of my jobs have come through LinkedIn, so I'm more of the
Right.
online networker.
And that's probably industry dependent too, but they make it pretty available here in Seattle as far as film and video games go. There are a lot of events you can attend, and they prioritize that. So for this industry, for the freelance industry, in person, yeah, in my experiences, is super super valuable.
So speaking of like the in person networking, were you able to meet some of your favorite composers?
Oh yeah, well, so I have, um, yeah, I mean, there is a composer by the name of Will Roget who really just, he's done work for Mortal Kombat and Helldivers and all these other games, and yeah, he just shows up as though he's anybody, which is really chill and super cool. So that's a great example of someone who just lives in the area, shows up to the events, and having a conversation with him. Although I know that the stuff he has produced and worked on is leagues farther than what I've accomplished to date, it doesn't feel like that when we're just chopping it up, you know? That's a really cool thing. So that's a good example of someone like that.
So like
And
quality
you
wise,
wouldn't really, yeah, yeah.
oh go ahead, my bad.
I think I was just going to wrap up that general point, which is just you wouldn't know that that person was like that, or you wouldn't know that a relationship like that was possible if you didn't really just have share a beer, have a conversation, um, just see what they're like. So,
Yeah, that's a great point. Like you don't really know who's gonna say yes until you ask them. Like when I first started the podcast, I had
right.
maybe like 50 subscribers, and I'm asking one of the biggest programming names out there, and he agreed to come on. I'm like, wow, like
Yeah, that's
wow.
sweet. This is similar to the point I made earlier about how I show up at my very first networking meeting. Nobody in the industry knows me, and I've got my notebook, and I just talk to people. A lot of people are happy to talk. A lot of people are just happy to have that conversation and share their wisdom. If you're there really willing to listen. Um, and maybe that's happened with some of your first big names. It is a bit surprising, but I think it makes sense. It is human nature to just want to, for a lot of people at least, it is human nature to just want to share their people's experience.
Yeah, I think the fact that you came with your notebook and you were eager
Yeah.
to listen, that kind of broke the ice a little bit. Like you say, people do want to pass their knowledge down. They do like mentoring people, and you showed that you're prepared for that mentoring.
Yeah, yeah. I think in the conversations that worked for sure. I'm trying to think if I have any examples, and I think most of them did. Right, most are. If the majority of my networking endeavors were negative, I probably wouldn't be here. But I definitely have had some, and that might be helpful. I want to see if I can actually. Okay, I can think of an example. If, honestly, embarrassingly recently, couple months ago, I went to a work in progress documentary screening. So something that the Seattle Documentary Association does here is um, they'll host these screenings of a director will show their documentary to a group in usually a small theater, and the goal is, they're on maybe like they're close to their final version, but they're not quite there yet. And the point is to show it to this group of film people to get feedback and to have a conversation. It's a great opportunity to learn about film. It's a great opportunity to just meet people in the industry. And it's a great opportunity to potentially meet a director who you may collaborate with or just know, right? Because again, most of the people you meet are not going to get you a job. Most of the people you meet, you're not going to get work from, but it's still worth knowing people in the industry and having that network. So anyway, that's what the Seattle Documentary Association does. And, throughout this time, I've just had, I've been running this algorithm in my head, which is make friends and pitch yourself when you feel like it makes sense. Fantastic advice. Not everybody gives good advice, right? So I've received other advice and other just like seeming people. What happened is I met this director at this work in progress event, and a few other people there who knew I was a composer, who knew I was someone who was looking for work and trying to find opportunities. At least one or two of them just said, "Oh, hey, look, this person, she doesn't have music in her film yet, right? It's all temp music. Like she needs a composer. You should go pitch yourself." And like I heard that once, and I was just like, "No, like I know that's not a good idea." But then I heard it again, and then I got convinced in that moment that I should. And I literally went up to her and I just did everything that you shouldn't do. I just went up to her. I introduced myself. She didn't know who I was. I told her I was a composer, and I just said, "Hey, if you need music, like call me up." I didn't even give her my business card. Like everything I did was the worst possible thing you could do, because I wasn't offering her anything, I didn't, she had no reason, not really. I was offering her like, "Oh, I'll do this. I can write a score for you." But really what I was saying is, can I have a job?
Right.
And so this happened, oh, it was a couple months ago. Or maybe it was like 4 months ago or something. It's, sometime in the spring. And I felt bad because I was like, geez, that hasn't, like, I thought that wasn't going to happen again. But I saw it in her eyes. This was the example I was thinking of when I said this earlier, where someone just like looks at you, shakes your hand and says, "Okay, thank you," and walks away. Yeah, that happened. So it's just, speaking of being embarrassed and just kind of screwing up a potential, or at least screwing up a moment. It's not to say if I ever see her again, she'll even remember. People often don't even remember you until you make your third impression, because there's so many people. But it definitely wasn't a great first impression. And it was a reminder. It's like, all right, don't just throw away my strategy that's been working because I hear a few people say otherwise, right?
Right.
They didn't know. They honestly didn't know. And, it's my fault for caving in, but it's a learning opportunity. So yeah, that happened, and that was helpful, honestly.
Yeah, that's a really interesting thing you mentioned, because I was talking to Brian, and he's doing the video game composing thing, and he's trying to pitch some of his work on LinkedIn, and if you just go up to people and be like, "Hey, check out my album," like 95% of the time they'll just ignore you. So
right, because there's so many people out there doing that too. There's another guy in the industry here named Ty Taylor, who runs a big portion of the Seattle Indies. And he's been a developer here for a while. He does great for himself. And I got coffee with him recently, maybe like a month or two ago, just, with the intent of building a relationship, a friendship. This is someone who I was lucky enough to be introduced to. Yeah, let's get a coffee. I'd love to learn from you. That's a great algorithm to be running in your head. I'd love to learn from you, right? I kind of still do the notebook thing just without having a notebook. It's like I still do ask questions, and I want to learn. I just don't need to be writing everything down now. So and it was a great conversation that I had with him. Something he told me in that conversation was that he gets, on average, an email a day from a composer who thinks they can just get a job working for him if they just say, "Hey, I'm a composer. I'd love to work on your next game. Here's my reel. Let me know." He just gets emails like that constantly. And I don't remember how that got brought up, because I definitely wasn't doing that then. I had learned my lesson. But learning that from him really just made viscerally clear. It's like there's so many people out here doing this similar to, hey, here's my album. 95, probably 99 people won't even click on it. Same with this game developer
Right.
who gets the email from the composer once a day of just getting a demo reel after demo reel. He knows he has this network of composers at this point, right? He's worked for Microsoft, it's if this is the person you're reaching out to, you're not going to form a relationship with him because it's going to be an immediate transactional business relationship.
Right.
It's going to be someone you can learn from. So
Yeah, that's a
similar
great point.
circumstance. Yeah.
Yeah, like even in the software industry, you try to apply for one of these jobs directly. 9 times out of 10, you're not even going to get a call back because 1,000 other people seen the LinkedIn job post and they're applying, and the AI is filtering you out. So, like the best way in is form relationships with these recruiters, and they'll pitch you to the company. And I haven't had to fill out a job application hardly ever, because
That's fantastic.
the recruiter just does that for me. So yeah, like you mentioned, forming relationships and not being transactional is extremely important.
Yeah. I had a friend point something out to me once. I have this networking tracker of people who I know in the industry, and I kind of have it categorized into like developer, or editor, or composer, or whatever. And again, it was one of these things that was super helpful that I leaned into and kind of keep track of when I had talked to people, when I should follow up, whatever. Super proud of it too. Very, very proud of it, because it was I used ChatGPT to help me code some. If the date had been like 2 months, that cell would be red, or it had been 2 months since I talked to this person, that cell would be red, and I know I need to follow up. So put a lot of work into it. Honestly, kind of proud of it. And it's been useful. And I showed it to a friend of mine here who's been in the industry a little bit longer than me as a technical sound designer. And he thought it was cool, but he said just that. He was like, yeah, just don't be cautious of everyone on this list be cautious of transactional relationships, is basically what he said.
Right.
And I think ever since he said that, I still use it. Like I think it's still good to have a database of some sort of just people, and just their website, just so you got it somewhere, because honestly, I like it. I like it much better than my contact list in my phone, because that's just mixed up with everything else in my life. So it's not that it's useless, but I heard him say that, and I just thought, yeah, you're right. I don't want to get so. These are all people. Every single name on this list is a human being, and that
Right.
matters. So yeah,
Yeah, I think it's
it helped kind
incredibly
of shine that light. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think it's incredibly important to, just get to know the person just for them, and not come off as like, okay, I'm just hitting you up because I want something. People can,
Yeah.
they can sense that and they'll cut you off.
They sniff it out, and it's not hard, honestly. For sure.
So like, okay, say, let's just use Brian for an example. Say like he's a budding composer and he wants to break into the industry. Aside from the networking, what can he do to make sure that his albums are getting seen, and maybe he ends up getting his music in the game?
Yeah. Well, I guess I'll go back to the point I thought about, or I made earlier. Like if you've been doing the Instagram and the YouTube thing for a while, and you think you got a sense of the algorithm, I would say dedicate time to that, and definitely do that. Um, just to make networking a piece of this answer. If you, as whether it's online or in person, if you feel like you've got a sense of one of those two, dedicate a portion of your time to that. I think another part of this answer is time management. Really, and maybe having, this is another piece of advice I got early on. Things can be incredibly overwhelming at first. If your goal is to be a game composer, be a media composer, be a film composer, just limit yourself to doing 3 things every day that get you closer to that goal. Now, that can be the point is 3 things every day, but make that consistent. 3 things a day, every day. That's the way to say it. And those things, that can be it's a very broad category of what gets you closer to your goal, because, maybe one day you send 10 emails to people you go to this networking event that happens that night, but then you also cook for yourself, right? Because you need to survive. Like, that counts. Things like that count, right? Or maybe you clean your apartment that day, because again, that counts. Like, you need to be able to live, right? So include those things, and just like have 3 fairly important things that you are going to put on your schedule, and you're going to do that every day. Eventually you kind of expand from that mentality, and things become more habitual. But I think what is very overwhelming is how much you have to do. Like, say you don't have any intuitions for any algorithm. Say you've never done networking in person. Honestly, that was me. Like, that was me. Like, I'm a relatively social person, but I didn't know how to network. So I kind of created a detailed Apple calendar that I could plan a day ahead. I used to try and plan a week or 2 ahead. That falls apart so quickly if you haven't done it before, because there's no way you can follow a plan that you've never really made. So I had to eventually pare it down to like 1 or 2 days. If by the end of the day I just knew what I was doing tomorrow, which was going to be, say, spend whatever the first part of my day finishing part of my demo reel so that I can go onto my website, and then I got to go to my barista job for whatever, like 5 hours, because again, that counts. That's living. That's just surviving. And then at the end of the day, I'll follow up with this one person that I met last week. That counts as a productive day. That's actually a very good day. And you just do that over and over again. Things become habitual, so you don't really feel like you have to keep track of all your tasks in that way, or you can think in broader scales. Maybe once you do that enough, you can plan a whole week ahead. But take it step by step. Be methodical, but don't try and take too big of a bite right at once.
Yeah, absolutely.
Then, yeah.
Oh yeah, you mentioned a great point about paring it down. I've heard, a lot of these people who are big in different industries say that, and I found it true myself. Like, say for example, social media, it's best to just focus on one platform and really build that up versus like 3 or 4 platforms where you're diluting your effort.
Yeah.
Like, once you build one up, then you can like transfer a lot of those followers to the other platforms, but it's best just to focus on one thing.
And when you do, I've heard a lot of YouTubers talk about this. When they figure out the algorithm and they make their YouTube videos, they've got a process. It's a few years into doing that, it's no longer even close to the amount of work they had to put into it starting out. So the process becomes intuitive. It becomes quicker. That frees up time. Now you can go to LinkedIn, or you can go to Instagram, or wherever else you might, or like create an online course. I mean, this is like way in the future for people, but it's things people do, right? The reason you see someone online who has an online course and who has a successful YouTube, engagement and Instagram, is because they didn't do it all at once. They've been doing it, and they did it piecemeal. thinking that it needs to all happen at once, and I have to keep on reminding myself this, thinking that it needs to all happen at once can be very, very overwhelming. But it doesn't really for anyone. Even for Billie Eilish, who, had the whole family, apparently, who helped her out, she still needs to make moves every day to stay Billie Eilish, right?
Right.
So, right.
Yeah, I think it's very important because like you mentioned, you don't want to get like burnt out, and your efforts are going to be diluted if you're trying to do too many things at once. So, like you
Yeah,
mentioned, pare down and focus on the essentials.
the essentials. Yeah, a day of progress. I think broadening your definition of what progress is can be helpful too. We can be really hard on ourselves and saying that, only a response from someone saying, I'm ready to work with you, that's the only thing that counts as progress. If that's your barometer for progress, you're just going to be disappointed. If that was my barometer for progress, I wouldn't I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't have eventually gotten video game scoring and film scoring gigs, right? Because it's so true that they actually do, insofar as just meeting people, the ones who you end up collaborating with, it's a very small percentage. So a nugget of progress is the fact that I reached out to someone today, or reached out to 5 people today, and then I'm going to follow up in a week or two. Um, Planning for the future, even planning for the future, is some sort of progress. So broadening your perspective on what a successful day looks like is huge, because it's about stringing together years of successful days and then continuing to do that even when you're a bit more in a substantial position. Um, very piecemeal, very piecemeal.
Yeah, that's a great point about not beating up on yourself, because that's kind of like why I stopped doing art, because I would always beat up on my art. Like I'd always see something wrong and I stopped enjoying it. And once you start getting that mindset of always finding flaws in your work, then it's no longer fun and you just end up quitting.
What kind
So
of art did you do?
more like pencil art, painting, that kind of thing.
Do you
I'm
still do it anymore at all, or?
No, no. I wanted to get into the game industry, doing art and all of that. And this was all the way back in like the high school, when I was in high school. It was like 20 years ago. But yeah, I would always beat up on my art and be like, oh, I don't like this, I don't like that. And it just stopped becoming fun. But, I eventually got in on the programming, and I'm not doing like video games, but, I could eventually end up back in the game industry doing programming.
Yeah, there's a certain amount of sometimes you got to distance yourself from your own work too. It's like you are not you are not your work, you're not your music, you're not even your ideas. If you're especially if you're someone who's creative, like you kind of at a certain point you recognize that I don't even know where my ideas come from. They just kind of emerge, right? So if I can't even account for the fact that I am creative, I can't I can't really blame myself if I have a bad day. Um, but you got to take that both ways. It's like I can't be too pompous and take too much credit if I have a great one either. I kind of know that creativity just comes in waves, and I have to accept that. And that's a muscle to train if you want to make it as well as a creative, for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah, I know we're kind of holding you on long, man, but I just got like one final question.
Sure.
What do you think about imposter syndrome in the composing industry?
Yeah, that's a great question. You got to deal with it. You got to deal with it. I mean, man, yeah, I think you got to kind of inhabit a mode of being that is one step ahead of where you are. And that means that there's, at least starting out, you don't necessarily have to do that indefinitely throughout your career. And I say you have to, and this is just more so what I've done. But when I guess I'll give you an example. The majority of my film credits when I was first meeting people, still the majority of my film credits are for small to low budget films, and either student films or just filmmakers who had a small budget, and that's pretty across the board, fairly common for filmmakers. But of course, my pursuit is to make this a substantial career, right? To be doing this full time. So it does take a little, and that's going to be the case for a lot of people. It does take a little bit of positioning yourself in the position of what your dream is, even if you hadn't made it there yet. So, to the extent that I have done my own marketing, which is really making my website look as good as I could possibly make it, and just making my LinkedIn and my Instagram presentable, really, those are kind of my 3 areas online. Using that, and in conversation with people, I would do my best to present myself as though I really was doing this full time, right? I'm pretty close to it at the moment, but just to be totally transparent, like I still have my side hustles, right?
Right.
But I would toe this line of putting that as my first foot forward. However, you don't want to lie to people. And if people ask you certain questions, people aren't going to start digging, people aren't going to start like interrogating you. They're going to want to go with whatever impression you give them, right? Because again, it's a very social industry, it's very conversational. But if for some reason someone does ask you like about your budget on your film or whatever, I don't recommend lying because that's just a cycle that you don't want to get stuck in. But the truth is every composer goes through imposter syndrome. Every successful composer you see has survived it and come out the other end. The way I've kind of approached it is trying to market myself and make a conversational first impression as though I'm a little bit farther than where I actually am. And I think that has been successful for me. Now, what that does is it puts a lot of pressure on you to deliver. This person is expecting the professional quality that was suggested by your conversation and by the way you present yourself. So take this example, Mech Storm, which is this game demo I just scored, which is going to be available soon. That was a lot of pressure to work on because I knew I wanted to write. Not only did I want to, but I had to write the best possible thing I could for this guy. He deserved it, right? That's what this game needed. And I budgeted 2 weeks for it. I ended up spending over a month on it. Luckily, that was fine because he wasn't on a tight timeline. But yeah, it takes a lot of front end effort. And then once you succeed in something like that, you can then become a little bit more comfortable with putting that front foot forward, that first foot forward, the way you have, because you're no longer pretending, kind of in scare quotes, but it's kind of true. So the imposter syndrome, I guess this is a long way of saying that imposter syndrome, it's not going to last forever, but I don't know of a composer, especially or sound designer, who has been trying the freelance route, who hasn't experienced it and who hasn't tried to deal with it some way. So it's not again, that's another hurdle. It's not a barrier. And it's totally surmountable. It's totally surmountable.
Well, absolutely, man. That was some great advice on imposter syndrome. But yeah, man, did you want to leave the audience with any closing thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, we covered a lot. It's if you find yourself stuck, try something different and then lean into what's working. And once you get that going and you feel comfortable with that, maybe start revisiting what got you stuck. Because the more you're good at, the better you'll be in the end. But you don't want to get bogged down in something unnecessary. Like, creatives can get bogged down in details that might not even matter that much in the end, but it's important to them because it's their work. But if you got to take a step back sometimes and just say, I'm going to come back to this later and I'm going to pivot. If you find success in a different direction, that's great. And then, failures or difficulties are always something you can revisit. I think that's something important to remember as well. And I think those are my
Absolutely.
closing thoughts. Sweet. Yeah.
All right, man. We appreciate you coming on the show, man. We'll definitely have to have you back.
Yeah, I'd love to. I really appreciate you having me on. Yeah, I hope you guys do super well with the podcast and YouTube and everything else you guys are doing. It's been a pleasure.
Oh, most definitely. Just in case anybody wasn't tuned in when you mentioned, where can everybody reach you at?
Yeah, I think the best place is my website because there are links to everything else through that. So that's ohnonotes.com, ohnonotes.com. I think you mentioned my LinkedIn will be attached somewhere in
Yes.
this. So yeah, so you can that's there as well. So, but yeah, that's also me on Instagram. So those are the main places you can find me. And hopefully, as the years go by, I'll be a bit more proliferated online. But yeah, for now, those are the spots.
Absolutely, man. It was a pleasure having you, and thank you everybody for tuning in. We'll catch y'all next time.